So my first year in practice, I was one day before my due date with my first child. David Steinberg, one of our senior hand faculty, was doing a course and had asked all the Penn faculty to participate in lectures. So I gave my talk, and while I was in the audience afterwards, my water broke, and then I had to go to the hospital. Dr. Levin was very concerned that I was not in the right condition to drive to the hospital, so he...
Welcome back to the Deep End podcast, where we explore the people, stories, and ideas shaping plastic surgery. I'm Saeed Azuri, here with my co-host Hank Davis. Today we're joined by Dr. Ines Lin, Associate Professor of Plastic Surgery at the University of Pennsylvania and Director of the Hand Surgery Fellowship at Penn. In this episode, we talk about Dr. Lin's journey into hand surgery, her master's in education, the role of mentorship in surgical training, and what truly makes an exceptional fellow. We also discuss the evolving landscape of surgical education, differences between orthopedic and plastic surgery trainees entering hand surgery, and how emotional intelligence and thoughtful teaching shape the next generation of surgeons. Dr. Lin, welcome to the Deep End podcast.
I'm Saeed.
I'm Hank.
And we're joined by Dr. Ines Lin from Penn Plastic Surgery, a dual appointment with orthopedic surgery, and the fellowship director of the hand program at University of Pennsylvania. And why we're all smiling is because we were just sharing a story that Dr. Lin once told me about how, she, back in the day when she was a resident was, times were very different. And Scott Levin, who's one
I
of
was
her
actually
mentors,
in my first year of practice, but times are probably very different back then too.
All right, so tell the story.
So my first year in practice, I was one day before my due date with my first child. David Steinberg, one of our senior hand faculty, was doing a course on a DRUJ implant arthroplasty with a cadaver lab and had asked all the Penn faculty to participate in lectures. So he knew that I was close, and I gave my talk, and while I was in the audience afterwards, my water broke, and then I had to go to the hospital. And Dr. Levin was very concerned that I was not in the right condition to drive to the hospital, so he drove me to the hospital so I could have my
that's
baby.
really nice. That's a great story.
What a special man.
And you knew that story already? I'm hearing that for the first time. That's crazy.
Yeah, I knew
it's come up a few times, yes, over the years with different residents.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of hints towards a little bit, what a special person he is, but how much over the years he's really enjoyed mentoring you in your career. And he's told me that as well. And so that kind of takes us to what we're interested in. And I think this is match season, right, for hand fellowships?
Yes, we did our interviews a little under a month ago. I know that there are fellowships who still have interviews through March. I think our submission deadline for our list is in April, and then match is in May.
Okay. So what initially drew you to hand surgery? Like, was there a defining case? Was it the technical aspect of it, the anatomy? I've heard so many different things from all my friends who are interested in hand.
Yes. So many people who know me know this story. I was not going to be a hand surgeon when I started residency. I did
not know that.
Yeah, my medical, residency application was about being a pediatric plastic surgeon. I wanted to learn clefts and do cleft lip and palate. And then, back then, Penn was a combined program. So 3 years of general surgery, then 3 years of plastics. One of the PGY4s always started with 3 months of hand, which back then was pretty much 3 months of being attached to benching at the hip. And I loved it. I still would say I was very intimidated by it. So I really, it's funny now, my husband will tell me, back then I was like, well, this is really cool, but there's just no way. It's so complicated. I don't even know what all the structures mean. And so he said, it was almost like I wouldn't let myself like hand because I was too intimidated by it. And then the second time around, as a PGY5, you go through it again. And I think, that's just, a core principle of education and learning, like going back to something and relearning it again from a different lens. And it clicked a little bit more. And I really thought that this was something that I could do. Initially, fellowship for me was to be a better plastic surgeon. But then as I went through fellowship, I realized how broad hand can be and all the different kinds of, organ systems you can operate on. And I was hooked and really didn't miss the other parts of plastic surgery that really initially is what drew me to the field.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that because I'm a second year resident for the listeners who don't know. And I just did my first 2 months of hand alongside you in the fall. And that sentiment is kind of still there about it being intimidating for the first time going through it. What makes hand surgery so intimidating to residents for the first time? Is it just like an unknown territory, or is it more than that?
I think the anatomy obviously is very
Yeah.
unique. There's a lot of other aspects of plastic surgery that maybe have a little bit more overlap. So like, if you are really into craniofacial, that overlaps with aesthetics. If you're really into micro and recon, that's also overlaps with, body contouring and aesthetics. But in some ways, hand is kind of just not really have a lot of overlap with other parts of plastic surgery, except for, I think someone recently joked around that someone had brachioplasty on their schedule, and that's still a hand case in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of idea that it doesn't really have as much overlap, except for maybe a free radial forearm flap, and the fact that the anatomy is fairly intricate. But I think it's a lot that makes it intimidating for people, I think, for early learners. But then I think it's like everything that we, develop expertise or passions for, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And then, the alphabet soup becomes less of a jumble and more comprehensible. And hopefully, and for people who love it, I think that's when like that light bulb clicks and it's like, okay, I could really do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. This is all giving me PTSD from my hand time, but I can tell you, Hank, and I've never told you this story, and I don't know if Dr. Lin remembers this story, but my very first night of hand call, I get a tendon laceration and a flexor tendon. I think it was like an avocado cutting or whatever, and it was in the Presby ER. And I was like gun-ho general surgery. So I call Dr. Land and I'm like, hey, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was like, hey, I have this tendon laceration. I'm happy to take care of it here in the ER and get it all fixed. And she's like, you can't really do that in the ER. But yeah, this is giving me, but I agree. I think for me, it's definitely the anatomy, but there's so many various aspects of hand that are so cool, like the ortho aspects, the vascular aspects, the nerve aspects. And I guess that one of those things is it kind of takes us to our next point is you being the director of the hand fellowship. What do you think your goal is under your leadership?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to, Doctors Bazanka, Steinberg, and Levin, who are the senior surgeons who are right now the core of that fellowship. They have a fantastic fellowship, and there's a strong history of hand surgery at Penn. Bill Bora was the founder of the fellowship, and it was started in the 70s. And I think that we are in a very fortunate place. I think hand surgery in general training is it's an amazing field, and I think that I love being here at Penn, but, there are so many great hand programs across the country, and, every program is a little bit different. Like some do more shoulder, elbow, some are pretty much all in orthopedics, some are all in plastic surgery. I will say, our fellowship lives in the Department of Orthopedics, and our fellows get a bulk of their elective practice with the orthopedic surgeons, but they take call with us in plastic surgery. We do some elective cases with them. So there is a nice mix. And that's one of the things I really have had the privilege of kind of being involved with as I've taken over this fellowship, and with Scott Levin as the chair emeritus of orthopedics, in terms of really trying to develop this collaborative relationship between orthopedics and plastic surgery. And we always had that. So it's not like, it came with me. My relationship with Dr. Levin and others and the history that's already been there, we were able to take it to the next level. And it's quite an honor for me to, be in charge of the fellowship as a plastic surgeon and hand surgeon.
Plus the history of your water breaking in the car. Take that all into consideration. No, but that's it. Sincerely, like that makes it a lot of sense. And I think with Dr. Levin, having worked with the senior people that you mentioned, you follow such a tremendous legacy and worked with a lot of the fellows out of that program, and have been very impressed with the collaboration, which you talked about, which I think is essential in plastic surgery, whether you're talking about hand or lower extremity reconstruction, et cetera. And telling the audience, what do you think separates a good fellow from an exceptional fellow?
I think there's something about a quiet hunger that exceptional fellows have that is just really heartwarming. The fellowship is 1 year, so it's a short period of time when we think about it relative to residencies. And obviously, you're very focused on a very subspecialty, but it's a short period of time. And so those fellows who are taking the quiet times that they might have because people travel or are away and seek other learning opportunities, I think those are the fellows who I really have been very proud of and have really enjoyed working with over the years.
That's good to know. And then even taking it one step before that, like for residents who who are thinking about it, even applying into hand, how competitive is it? And when do you think they should start preparing for that process?
But the competitiveness of hand fellowship varies from I think there's ebbs and flows of interest. And as we know, the number of positions are fairly static. So, there was a period of time where spots were unmatched. And then there are times where there's pretty good parity. And so the chances of you matching are quite high. I think the competitive programs, the highly desirable programs, are always going to be competitive. But I think the good thing is that if you really want to do a hand fellowship, you should be able to match and do a hand fellowship. And I think just like what I tell people about plastic surgery residency, if at the end of the day, you're going to get excellent training at any fellowship, and it's going to allow you to get your, CAQ and, be a board certified hand surgeon. So it's all about, grabbing those opportunities and making the most of it. In terms of when to kind of get started on the process, I think you should start as soon as you know you want to do it. We've had some residents in orthopedics and plastic surgery who start residency already knowing, and they have laid the groundwork from the beginning. Like, as faculty, we know that they're interested. They're doing research, they're going to meetings, and they're super engaged when, on hand call, and it, clearly shows, and they're going to have that extra little level of preparation for when they start their fellowship. But as I told you earlier, I didn't find out or self-realize that I wanted to be a hand surgeon until my 5th year. I actually missed the deadline for a lot of applications, and I was scrambling trying to get my application together. So that would not be my recommended way to do it. But I think that if you want to do it, you just have to put yourself out there. The beauty, I think, of the small field that we have in plastic surgery is that, if you want to do something, there are always people who will support you and help you through it. And, and if your application doesn't have all the hand papers and things like that, but you've clearly demonstrated interest and passion in other areas of your specialty, it's very easy to say, I found it late and I'm transitioning now. And I think all of us understand that.
Yeah. And I know you were saying you just less than a month ago finished your interviews for the hand fellowship, and we're just reviewing applications probably. So what are some of the most common mistakes that you see, from a resident's perspective who's going to be applying to a fellowship and something? What are just some red flags, that you see on applications, or something that you see all the time that people could do better?
I will say that the applications we get are really impressive. So my answer to your question is not because I see it all the time, because I don't think it's that common. I think that in general, by the time you're applying for fellowship, you've been through the application process how many times, right? You've applied to medical school, college, residency, who knows, jobs, research fellowship. So I think in general, people kind of know the, do's and don'ts of don't get your personal statement crazy or anything like that. But I will say the thing that I have noticed a few times in people, and I think that it is worth mentioning, and I don't know how often people talk about this, is your letters of recommendation. Like plastic surgery, hand surgery is a small field. And so we, more than other things, put a lot of weight on your 3 or 4 letters. And you really have to think carefully about, are you asking the right people to write your letters? Are these people who are really going to bat for you? And sometimes it may be better to include a letter from someone who is really going to be a strong advocate, knows you well, may not be as nationally connected, than maybe a more generic or even like kind of lukewarm letter from someone who, you maybe interacted with just a couple times, but because they have the title, that's why you're including them. I think sometimes can work against people. I don't think it sandbags them, but I think that it may not provide that advantage that they were looking for.
Yeah. There's nothing like that verification of, hearing it from somebody else. And I totally agree. I mean, it takes us to like the integrated applications when you see very strong, I mean, that's probably one of the best or the most important aspects of that application process is seeing what people write about other people. And, are they conscientious? Are they safe? Are they dependable? Are they, those are the sorts of things. But yeah, I can't agree more. And Hank, that's come up a couple of times, but it's always good to
Yeah.
reiterate the importance of letters of rec. And then one thing that I thought was always interesting about hand or unique in that it's both sets of trainees, ortho and plastic surgery. And these are people who have had completely different training pathways. Do you notice any differences in the applications between orthopedic residents and plastic surgery residents? And what are some of the areas that either one of them can work on more?
I think my answer to that is a little bit kind of the typical generalizations we make of orthopedic surgeons and plastic surgeons in some ways in terms of what their skill sets are. Obviously, when we think about what strengths people have depending on their training background, I think orthopedic residents have a lot of experience with bony fixation, bony work, joint work, arthroscopy. And so a lot of the residents come with the skills very established in those areas. When we train orthopedic surgeons as hand fellows, many of them, are seeking the kind of the micro side of things, the nerve handling, tissue handling, free flap reconstruction, which obviously is something that we do a lot of at Penn. And so, getting that kind of experience, replant experience at the level 1 trauma center, those are things that sometimes they feel very uncomfortable with at the beginning of fellowship, depending on how much experience they had in their residency. And so I feel like a lot of times, besides rounding out their general hand practice, is kind of that soft tissue reconstruction aspect of our practice in terms of our limb salvage program. The plastics, I think, as we all would anticipate, plastic surgeons are very good at soft tissue and, limb reconstruction and micro. And so I see this a lot in some of our junior residents who maybe don't have like a woodworking background or things like that. So the bony work is something that they need extra time in and extra reps in, and kind of understanding those principles of when you're putting a plate on, why are we putting the plate on in this way? What are the principles? I would say most orthopedic residents can probably spout off all of those things in their sleep.
Yeah. And it's definitely something that I notice as well, which makes me think of the importance of a lot of these skills labs as trainees to get some of that, to supplement your knowledge with some of that stuff that you don't necessarily get.
I just wanted to say we just had a upper extremity
I
cadaver
know, that's
lab
why I brought that
last
up.
weekend.
Yeah.
Yes, so which was really great opportunity.
I've heard
for
a
us
lot
to
of great
get-
things about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to work on that skill set, since it might not be as natural to us coming from a plastic surgery background. It's interesting to touch upon like the technical and philosophical differences between the two. One question I wanted to ask is, it's so interesting to me how there's still a lot of physicians. I kind of understand the general public who are not doctors might not understand or realize that plastic surgeons can do hand surgery and be hand surgeons, but it's surprising a lot of times consults from the ED or from just other facets of the hospital that don't understand when we say plastics. They're like, no, I'm sorry, I meant to get hand surgery or something like that. I'm like, oh, no, that is us. We are hand surgery. So I'm just curious your thought on that. And, if that's still prevalent in your practice, even to this day, where people are surprised when you say you're a plastic surgeon.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the numbers, 85% of hand surgeons in the United States are orthopedics trained. So it makes sense, depending on where you trained, where you've practiced, that for many physicians or other providers, hand surgeons are orthopedic surgeons. That, it's just, that's the way the math would work out. But actually a lot of the early hand surgeons, looking back in the early 1900s, were plastic surgeons, general surgeons who were, describing these tendon transfers and things like that, are, some of the core procedures in our field. I mean, Philadelphia is a very saturated market as a hand surgeon. And I spent many of my early years in practice telling patients, like, you are in the right place. I can take care of your distal radius fracture, et cetera, et cetera. And now that I've been in practice long enough, it's really, I think, less of an issue, but I think it is going to be something that is, I think, just with numbers, is something that would not surprise me if that continues to be, a sentiment that's shared every so often. But it's
Yeah.
different internationally. It's, different it can be more plastic surgeons doing hand, or at least hand up to the wrist. And then, more proximal is more orthopedics.
Yeah. And kind of a different aspect of this whole topic of conversation. You were at Penn for a while, and then you scrambled to get your application together, and then ended up at one of the best fellowship training programs, and you went to Mayo Clinic. I'm curious, and this is something that I went through myself. When you were at Penn as a trainee prior to going off into hand fellowship, how did you view fellowship? Because obviously it could have been easier for you to just stay put and just do the hand fellowship at Penn. And then did you know that you wanted to go somewhere and then bring something back to Penn? Did you have an idea that you were coming back as faculty?
I have to say, back then, I'm not sure I was mature enough to really think about kind of my network and my professional network and my avenues of mentorship. I think back then I was probably just trying to make sure I could get enough interviews to match at a reasonable place and be a hand fellow. But and I will say again, the network that you have in your residency or in your, whatever program and that you're at, plastic surgery is a small field, and it's important to leverage it. And I have to give a lot of credit to Dr. Cerletti for reaching out to people he knew all across the country when I was scrambling to get my application out. He, sent out a bunch of emails, and many people said, hey, as long as we have interview dates, and if, we review the application, this seems like a reasonable person, we will be happy to offer an interview. And so that's how I was able to get an interview invite to Mayo. And then it's just about, I think, it's a good comment about like, how do you use your fellowship in the context of your residency and where you want to take your career. And I am a big believer that your fellowship should, unless you know that, like, in order to, for example, be an academic microsurgeon, I need to do a micro fellowship. Obviously for me to be a hand surgeon who's CAQ'd, I need to do a hand fellowship. But one of the things that I think has gotten a lot better now compared to when I was a resident was, I think our hand experience at Penn has gotten a lot deeper. And so back then I really felt that with what I would potentially want to do with my practice, which was I was not going to be a craniofacial surgeon, I was not going to be an aesthetic surgeon. What I felt that I was lacking was, a really good understanding of hand, and that this was going to make me a better reconstructive plastic surgeon. And then as I was going through all my interviews, and I really was, not sure where Mayo would fit, because I think, as someone who had spent a lot of years on the coast, wasn't really sure what to make of Minnesota. And it was a 2-day interview. You do Thursday afternoon, you have a Thursday social dinner thing, and then Friday morning. And I remember talking to, my now husband Thursday night, being like, I really, really like this place. And I was very surprised that it had such a strong impression on me. And so that was where I wanted to go. And some of it was just the feeling that you get from meeting the people. I mean, these are giants in the field of hand surgery with the most humble personalities and very approachable. But then they also had exposure to clinical things that I had not seen a lot of, exposure to brachial plexus, exposure to arthroscopy, which I had never done as a resident, exposure to like kind of better understanding the DRUJ. And even now the fellowship's grown in terms of other things that, I never would have thought about, like spasticity and other things. So it is important, I think, to think about the fellowship in kind of the bigger context of what are my gaps, or what are the things that I want to gain experience in. And I am a huge believer of going somewhere else. You trained at Penn, went away for fellowship, and then came back. And there was talk of, well, we would love to have a second hand surgeon join our group. But it was not like there was an offer until like well into my fellowship year, or
that sounds like me.
Even in the job created to invite you to interview. So you never know, and you just never know where life is going to take you. So you don't, obviously, I always tell people, until something's written in a contract, don't count on it.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Keep all your options open. So I think that is an important thing. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew that it was important to go somewhere else, get a different perspective. And I encourage everyone to do that, no matter whether they're going to come back, or you just need to get broad experience. And it broadens your professional network, kind of, as you had asked in your question.
Yeah, that's a lot of that is how I felt as a trainee leaving Penn. And I remember the mention of a potential job for me, but then when I went off to fellowship, it was like crickets and I didn't hear a thing. So you're right. And I actually would take it one step further. Like I'm always of the mindset where like I don't believe something until I'm physically actually working. So like a contract is one thing, a signature is one thing, but until I actually start. But I wanted to pivot a little bit into your education philosophy because it's something that I admire a lot based off of being a trainee under you and a colleague alongside you. But obviously you won the Outstanding Faculty Educator Award through ACAPS. And you have a master's in education, which I don't see in your name on the screen, but you do have a master's in education. So what motivated you to formalize your training as an educator? And how do you think that that's kind of changed the way that you teach?
That is a question that can be a challenge to answer in some ways because I think there's so many facets. Why I wanted to do a master's in education was I was a few years into practice. I was trying to think about like, well, how am I going to kind of make myself unique in the field of academic plastic surgery? You know, one I'd in medical school thought about going to business school and getting an MBA. Like one of my bachelors as a college student was in economics. And so there was some potential interest. But then I really thought about, you know, kind of our educational environment here at Penn. And I think it's very good in many ways. But I felt like it was a little stagnant compared to what we had as what I had as a resident. Like the format was fairly similar. And, you know, it seemed like a lot of other specialties like surgery, emergency medicine were, you know, kind of coming up with different ways to educate or more interesting ways to educate. And that there is, you know, probably some science behind education that maybe, you know, that I was not aware of, that our specialty is maybe less aware of. I happened across, I think, a flyer or email advertising the med-ed program at Penn, which I will tell anyone who's listening, if they're interested, it's a phenomenal program. It's a collaborative venture between the Graduate School of Education, which is a fantastic graduate school in education, and the medical school. And it's grown quite a bit from like probably the class being primarily Penn Med faculty to now people flying in from all over the country to get this degree. Wow. And it's set up as kind of more of an executive program. So it's 2 long weekends a semester and then some, you know, asynchronous and virtual sessions. And it's very hands-on, like you're learning about learning theory, educational theories. You're learning a little bit about kind of qualitative research. We do a little bit of organizational psychology work. And it really opened my eyes to, you know, all the potential opportunities to make education more robust. I have to say, you know, balancing all the things you learn and want to do with, you know, the busyness of practice and the schedule restrictions that we have. You know, our residents are busy clinically, and there's only so much time that you can offer that's, you know, really protected. I think that the knowledge has been helpful. I'm not sure I've made a huge impact in terms of, you know, improving the learning environment in our residency, but it did give me some foundation. I did a lot of stuff with ASPS a few years ago until I kind of rotated off the progression of leadership with the resident education curriculum through ASPS. And I've done some stuff with education through the American Society for Surgery of the Hand. So, you know, it is something that I'm still very interested in. In terms of personally, as a teacher, I think it's helped me, you know, really try to mix up my learning formats, you know, cadaver labs, sawbones, you know, we did I guess you could call it a simulation with pig's feet and flexor tendon repairs, you know, and recognizing that people can look up a lecture on flexor tendon or they can read a chapter, and rather than hearing me give them a talk on it for an hour, like let's do a hands-on lab. So, you know, we're, you know, trying to kind of mix things up in that way. And then the other thing, which, you know, you and I've talked about in terms of education, is kind of the non-technical skills side of surgery education and training, you know, recognizing the importance of interpersonal communication, emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
kind of self-regulation in terms of how we function in groups. And so that's something else that as you know, I have an interest in, and I've tried to do a little bit of stuff with the residents at Penn.
Yeah, something that's always impressed me about you is your patience in the operating room. And I'd have to say a lot of it with me is you coming in as an independent, really having minimal microvascular experience. Obviously the bony work, the anatomy is completely foreign to me, but I was always so impressed by how patient you were in the operating room, taking the time to teach, taking the time to watch us kind of struggle through things. Is that something that are you just like, would your husband describe you as a patient person? Or is that something that you kind of have to like in the operating
Channel.
room? Yeah, like channel and sort of teach yourself.
Well, thank you very much first for that comment. I think I am a patient person. I don't think I'm not in a huge rush to get something done. If there's an opportunity to, do it in a different way or better, or, for residents to learn something, I think I guess I have a little bit more patience in terms of time, set my sense of time in that way. I will say I probably am not always that way at home with getting my kids out for something. But in general, I think it is something that I think it's inherent. It's just, I think, me. But it's like anything in life. I think if you had a desire to be more like it, you could work on it, so.
One other question I had about your in education was, did studying education give you a kind of a new appreciation of how difficult it is to teach somebody something surgically, or like surgical education, as opposed to, a traditional education, in a classroom, or just medicine? But teaching someone to be a surgeon, I feel like, is a whole nother level.
It's complicated. It's multifaceted, which I think is what makes it hard. Like if you think about some things, if you're, pedagogical teaching, like in our kids, you're teaching them knowledge for the most part. There's some physical skills, maybe getting up to, obviously handwriting is a physical skill, but getting up to give a presentation, there's, some physical performative nature to it. But a lot of it is imparting knowledge, giving someone the opportunity to interpret something. So it's all kind of, in here in many ways.
Yeah.
I think the challenge with surgery is you have to do in the cerebral stuff, but you also have to teach someone a physical skill. And I've seen over the years, you have some people who like their physical skills lag, but they understand everything. And so it's like trying to connect that. And then there are some people who like are just technically wonderful, but like getting their knowledge base caught up. And I think that is the challenge with surgery, is you have to integrate all of that. Like, I think some parts of being a technically good surgeon is probably extremely trainable. Just like, you can
Yeah.
train to like run maybe a certain pace of a mile. Like you can just
Yeah.
work at it. But then there's everything else, right? You can't just say, I can do a good anastomosis and that's it. You have to be
Yeah.
able to say, I know when it's going bad. I know how to do my dissection. I know how to manage a patient. And that's, I think, the challenge and the complicated part of teaching surgery.
And under the pressure of, the high stakes as well, because you could teach somebody to shoot a jump shot or whatever, which is also different than being a point guard and like being able to read the whole floor and be a floor general and see plays happening in real time. But that's also, you lose the basketball game. It feels like the end of the world when you're playing, but obviously it's not the high stakes of surgery. So that even increases it to another level, the
Yeah.
stress and difficulty.
And the challenge is you can do everything right and still have
Yes.
a bad outcome. And I think that's also the hard part of, whether of being a surgeon and also teaching that in surgery is, managing all of the emotional ups and downs.
Intelligence.
So,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it shows you the importance too, and how much we kind of respect that in our peers, our colleagues, our trainees, is the emotional intelligence aspect of it. The other thing I want to talk about is you and your husband are both physicians. Tell the audience, what's your husband do?
he's a pediatrics infectious disease specialist.
Okay.
So he's who I call when I
Oh.
have questions about antibiotics.
Yeah.
I was
But
going to say a
the
rough
bad
flu season.
Yes.
but the bad
it
part
has been.
about that is that he probably limits the amount of the duration that you want to put your patients on.
Yes. Well, he has trained me well. So overall, I think I'm a very reasonable person in terms of antibiotics. But yes, like it's not uncommon that I'll, text him and be like, I have this culture data, or like
Yeah.
the micro lab gave me this organism, but they're not going to check susceptibilities. What do I do next?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, it's an outpatient. So you're not going to like, you can't consult ID or anything like that.
Yeah. But so you guys are both physicians. You're a mom, very devoted mom, but as you mentioned, you're in no rush to leave the operating room and educator, you're the fellowship director. By coming from that household with like the dual physician home, how do you navigate your career demands on top of everything else? What have you learned through that process? And what do you think might be, the pros and potentially like the hardest part about that position?
It's an interesting question to answer now because I think that I'm struggling a little bit more with that now than I was maybe a few years ago. And I will say I have two kids, 11 and 14. Our nanny we had since the first one was 8 weeks old all
Wow.
the way
Wow.
until a little over a year ago. And so in some ways, like having that stability was made me lean into being a surgeon very easy as I had someone who was reliably watching the kids was when they were of the age to go to school, someone would take them to school, someone would pick them up, someone could take them to wherever they had to go to. And all I really had to worry about was the one time that the younger one broke her arm, which was fine, just needed a
At
cast.
least it was an upper extremity.
Yeah. And like doctor's appointments or dentist appointments and things like that. And so when our nanny decided to leave, my husband and I had a talk and we decided like, you know what? I have to say, has been very generous with his time in terms of, dedicating to the household because he also has an academic job. But he basically, his hours are a little bit different. And he's like, I can take the kids to school. I think, we can make after school work. Like they might have to stay until 5 or 6 when we can pick them up, but we should be able to make it work. And so we have been making it work most of the time. But it has been a struggle. I mean, like Tuesday, clinic finished a little early so I could run out and pick them up from school, take them to a skating sessions for them to practice. But it meant that I have like 20 charts left
Yes.
to finish. I was very good about always finishing my charts until now, and now I'm struggling. But it's on some ways it's great because I will say for people who feel guilty that they're missing their kids' lives when they're young, they really don't remember. They really don't. Like, I mean, my kids, we would take them on vacation when they're 5 and 6, and except for what we tell them through photos, they're like, I really don't remember any of that. But now they remember these things. And my background is Lake Louise, where we went last summer with my parents and my sister. And they remember all of that. I mean, the older one picked all the hikes that we did. So, I feel like it's harder now that they're older and now that we don't have, my solution back in the day was farm everything out that you don't want to do. And now I still kind of believe that is the right thing, or that is the way to make it work. But, you do want to be there and spend time with them. And so it has been a little bit of a struggle on how I can, what is that right balance? I don't know. I don't think I'll ever figure it out. So I'll probably just feel a little bit of guilt here and there.
Yeah. And it's funny now that you're right. We have that security blanket with our nanny and we have the same way. And I can't believe yours lasted for so long. And then when they disappear, you recognize kind of like what you almost took for granted in a way. And then life flies by and trying to cherish those moments with your kids before they get too old and leave the house is very important. How do you think we're also going through a phase now, which is very exciting, particularly in our training program where I think we have a record number of parental leave and maternity leave. And so how do you think you being a parent has changed the way you kind of mentor the trainees?
I mean, I certainly can relate to what they're going through. I think, I will say, I think taking parental leave and being pregnant as a faculty member is probably very different than being pregnant as a trainee. I mean, I have been there up all night replanting an arm, 8 months pregnant and taking them back every week until, all the reconstructions were done until I had my kid, like that story of Scott taking me to the hospital, giving a talk. Like, in some ways, like you can relate to it once you've been through it yourself. That being said, I don't think that, it's just like anything in mentorship. Like, yes, it's easy if you can relate, but it doesn't mean that it's exclusive to that. So I think it's a great move forward, I think, in terms of recognizing, like, I feel like, historically it was something that like was tolerated. And yes, it is a little bit of a burden sometimes in terms of figuring out how to, provide, coverage and maintain the amount of education that you want to do. But it is, I think, a very important life event that people are having that should not wait until you're done training, unless you want it to, which
Yeah.
is a different thing.
Yeah, and I'll say that I think Hank's heard this before, but in general surgery at Hopkins, which was very old school, one of my co-residents or co-chiefs was on her second baby by the time we were chiefs, and graduation won the best technical award, the hardest worker award. And so, you can do it all. And I think that we're witnessing it now that, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Training and parenthood do not have to be mutually exclusive. So this takes us into like our last few kind of fun questions. What's your favorite OR music and surgical instrument?
So I will say I love having music in the OR. I really don't care what kind of music it is, as long as it's not like extremes of maybe like, I don't know, like rap or, heavy metal or something. But like, I think like very easygoing oldies, retro, pop, happy. And I'm happy to let, the circulator pick it. In terms of instrument, it's hard to pick one, but I probably would say either the Littler scissors, which is always on the handset, or the black-handled tenotomy scissors.
Oh, I love the black, but they have to be good. That's the problem. Like,
yes,
some of the black-handled,
I mean, that's a given, right? You can't just like say that my favorite instrument's a bad instrument.
Yeah. Some of my daughter's scissors cut better than the ones that I use in the OR.
And then what's something about you that people would be surprised to know that they may not?
So we're a family of 4, my husband, me, and my 2 daughters. We love to play collaborative games and do escape rooms. So we've done more than 30 escape rooms. There's actually a really cool app that's I think of it as like Yelp for escape rooms. And so when we travel somewhere and we anticipate like a little bit of downtime, we'll look up an escape room in that app. And it has all the ratings, and these are usually by people who do a lot of escape rooms, so they're pretty trustworthy. And we have done some amazing escape rooms, and we had a good one in Seattle, in Denver. Last year we did spring training in Clearwater. There was an amazing one in Clearwater.
Oh, that's cool.
And and
are there different levels? Like some of them are really complicated, and are any of them scary? Like I'm not going to be able to escape this.
Well, I will say so. I don't know if y'all have done an escape room before, but they're a lot of fun. But there's usually like a game master, and the good escape rooms will have like a dedicated game master whose job is to get you through the game. So they will help kind of feed you clues, or if you're stuck and you say, "Can I get a clue?" Every game, every company might have some variability. Like we had one place that said you can only ask for 3, but they'll give you some extra nudges. And so hopefully with the right help, you can get your way through and be successful.
Honestly, it's like a good attending, with your resident, it's like how much do I need to be over them, and how much can I let the leash go a little bit,
There you go.
Yeah.
So you do have a game master to help. There are different themes. So, and with our younger kid who's a little sensitive to scary ones, we will avoid what looks like a scary room. And there are some that are extremely complex. Like we did the one in Clearwater was basically turned into a series of 4 rooms. So like you thought you were done, and then you would go into another room and there'd be a whole other series of puzzles. And it was supposed to be an hour-and-a-half escape room, which we did in an hour-and-a-half. But then they said, "Oh yeah, if there's no one who's booked after you, you could just keep going. Like we don't care."
Cool.
And so like it's fun. It's fun. It's like, and it works on all the things that, not to be too geeky about it, but it works on all the things that like we were talking about: communication, working together, being a team. We were talking about it at a meeting for the American College of Surgeons I was at, and they were saying that one of the program directors was saying they do it for their interns coming in.
That's fun. I was just going to say, maybe we should do that as like a resident.
Let's do it.
That'd be funny. A scary one though.
It's a part of your evaluation.
I don't like
exactly.
scary. If you weren't a hand surgeon, what would you be doing?
So the question is like, there's the practical side. Do I have to still make enough money to keep my house afloat? And then I
Yes.
probably would work in industry, like some kind of industry, to use my knowledge as a
Yeah.
hand surgeon. But
Yeah.
if like, just like passion project, there's part of me that would love to open a panini food truck. Because
Oh, that's awesome.
when I was a resident and medical student, obviously, you may know Philadelphia's got a big food truck, or at least Penn has a big
Yes.
food truck culture. That's my
Yeah.
We would come. Hank and I
Yeah.
would come. You'd
Oh,
have
for
two
sure.
people on a daily basis.
But yeah, Dr. Lin, thank you again so much for doing this. We really appreciate it, and we were excited to have you on.
I just want to say it's been a real honor to be a part of this. You have had some really dynamo plastic surgeons on this podcast. And so to be included in the list of people is really just a special honor. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Deep End, a plastic surgery podcast. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating on Apple Music or Spotify. Video from the podcast is available on Instagram and YouTube at The Deep End Podcast. Join us again soon for more conversations with luminaries and experts from the world of surgery.